What if I told you that some of the biggest heavy metal legends drank enough alcohol to fill over 100,000 bottles, blacked out for entire tours, and still managed to make history on stage? From Ozzy Osbourne stumbling onto the wrong stage to Bon Scott drinking himself into oblivion. Here are 25 heavy metal legends who were drunk all the time. 1. Ozzy Osbourne lived in a world of alcohol and chaos. Ozzy Osbourne saw every day blur into whiskey, beer, and out-of-control behavior. During his time in Black Sabbath, he forgot lyrics, missed cues, and was often too drunk to stand. Sometimes he stumbled onto the wrong stage, too intoxicated to realize he was in the wrong city. Even Black Sabbath, known for wild living, had limits. In 1979, his own bandmates kicked him out, tired of his reckless ways. Instead of getting better, he got worse. Ozzy locked himself in hotel rooms surrounded by empty bottles. His solo career only fueled his madness. The moment he bit a bat's head off wasn't planned. It happened in a drunken haze. He urinated on the Alamo while wearing his wife's clothes, getting himself banned from San Antonio for 10 years. His team carried him off planes, held him up during shows, and tried to keep him together. His addiction hurt everything in his life. In 1989, in a blackout rage, he attacked his wife, Sharon. She had him arrested but stayed, believing she could help. He went through failed rehab attempts, short moments of sobriety, and many relapses. Even as a father, he couldn't stop. His kids saw him swing between rock star and wreck. 2. James Hetfield didn't drink for fun. James Hetfield drank to escape. As Metallica became famous, his addiction grew worse. He was reckless and angry, often too drunk to play. Blackouts became normal, yet he still performed like a rock god. But behind the scenes, he was falling apart. In 1992, on tour with Guns N' Roses, he walked into a pyrotechnic blast during a show. His body burned, but he drowned the pain in alcohol. By the late 90s, he had lost control. James lashed out, pushing away family and friends. Metallica was cracking under the pressure. In 2001, he vanished without a word. Months later, he reappeared in rehab, finally facing the truth. His drinking was destroying everything. His battle was exposed in Some Kind of Monster, a documentary showing a man struggling between addiction and his band. Sobriety was tough, but he fought for it. For nearly 20 years, he stayed clean, proving he was stronger than his demons. But in 2019, he relapsed. Addiction never fully goes away. It waits for a weak moment. Even after everything, he remains a legend, a man who keeps fighting his way back from the edge. 3. Dave Mustaine got kicked out of Metallica for drinking too much. Dave Mustaine was impossible to work with due to his anger and drinking. In 1983, his bandmates had enough. They threw him out without warning and sent him back to California on a bus. Humiliated and furious, he swore revenge. Instead of changing, he drank even more, using his rage to push himself. He formed Megadeth, a band meant to be faster and heavier than the one that fired him. Mustaine ran Megadeth with the same anger that got him kicked out of Metallica. He drank constantly, and his temper exploded over the smallest things. Bandmates came and went because he fired them in drunken rages. He picked fights with journalists, fans, and even his own crew. Once, he hit a bandmate so hard he knocked out his teeth. His reckless lifestyle caught up with him. One night, he crashed his car while drunk and barely survived. Doctors warned him, but he ignored them. Years of drinking finally caught up with him in the late 90s. He passed out in a way that cut off circulation to his arm, causing nerve damage so bad he couldn't play guitar. His career and everything he had built were slipping away. 4. Lemmy Kilmister wasn't just a rock star. Lemmy Kilmister was a machine powered by whiskey. For over 40 years, he drank a full bottle of Jack Daniels every day. Most people wouldn't survive a month on his routine. But Lemmy kept going. Whether on stage or at the Rainbow Bar in Los Angeles, he always had a drink in his hand. Doctors couldn't understand how he was still alive. His body should have failed, but he defied science and kept going. Drinking wasn't just something he did, it was who he was. No amount of warnings could change him. Even after he was diagnosed with diabetes and heart disease, he didn't quit. He just switched from whiskey to vodka, calling it a healthier option. His body began to break down, but he refused to stop. He played concerts even when he could barely stand, his voice rough and raw, his bass thundering like a war machine. Fans saw him as unstoppable, a man who laughed at death. But even Lemmy had limits. In his final days, his body gave out, but his spirit never did. He died in 2015, leaving behind a legacy like no other. His life was reckless but unforgettable. Few could match his level of excess, and none could do it with his strength. He lived and died on his own terms, whiskey in hand, forever a legend. 5. Dimebag Darrell wasn't just a guitarist. Dimebag Darrell was the life of the party with a guitar in his hands. At the heart of his wild nights was his favorite drink, the Blacktooth Grin, a mix of Crown Royal and Coke. It wasn't just something he liked. It was a must for anyone partying with him. While some drank to escape, Dimebag drank to celebrate. For him, alcohol wasn't about running away from problems. It was about making great nights even better, filled with laughter, music, and chaos. Wherever he went, the party followed. His tour bus wasn't just for travel. It was a rolling bar, packed with enough booze for weeks. He drank from morning to night, but it never slowed him down. No matter how much he had, he could still play perfect solos, shredding his guitar like no one else. Even after nights of heavy drinking, he would wake up, grab his guitar, and create some of the best metal riffs ever. But his wild ride ended in tragedy. In 2004, he was murdered on stage, shocking the entire metal world. His death left a hole in heavy metal, but his legend never faded. Every time someone raises a Blacktooth Grin, his spirit lives on. His love for music, his energy, and his passion made him unforgettable. Dimebag didn't drink to forget. He drank to make life louder, crazier, and more fun. His name still echoes through every blazing solo and every toast made in his honor. 6. Phil Anselmo was a different story. Phil Anselmo's drinking wasn't like his bandmate Dimebag. While Dimebag drank for fun, Anselmo drank to escape. From the early days of Pantera, whiskey was his shield, his fuel, and his downfall. He took big swigs straight from the bottle before stepping on stage, turning his pain into raw energy. But alcohol didn't just push him forward, it pulled him down. He lashed out at fans, bandmates, and anyone who got too close. What started as a rock star's habit soon became a dangerous addiction. As Pantera got bigger, so did Anselmo's drinking. Whiskey wasn't enough. He mixed it with other things, pushing himself to the limit. His rants grew longer, his outbursts more wild. The band started to crack under the weight of his addiction. In 1996, his body finally gave out. He overdosed and was legally dead for several minutes before being revived. But even that wasn't enough to make him stop. He kept disappearing for days, missing shows, and showing up too wasted to perform. Fans saw it happen in real time, his once powerful presence turning into chaos. By the early 2000s, Pantera was falling apart, and Anselmo's drinking played a big role in the breakup. Then came the worst tragedy, Dimebag's murder. The band had never made peace, and Anselmo was left with deep regret. Though he eventually got sober, the damage was done. His story is a warning. Alcohol can be fun, but it can also destroy. 7. Zakk Wylde. Wylde was born for heavy metal, long hair, leather, and a wild way of living. As Ozzy Osbourne's guitarist and the leader of Black Label Society, he followed one rule: play loud and live even louder. From the start, he embraced the madness, drinking beer and whiskey like water. On stage, he'd take swigs mid-solo, never missing a note. Fans loved it. He was the wild man of metal, unstoppable and untouchable. But even the toughest rockers have limits. Years of heavy drinking caught up to him. In 2009, doctors gave him bad news. Blood clots in his body put him at high risk for a stroke or heart failure. His body had finally had enough. He had a choice: keep drinking and risk his life, or quit and try to survive. It wasn't easy. His whole image was built on living large. Stepping away from that life felt like stepping into the unknown. Quitting alcohol was tough. Fans were used to seeing him with a drink, and changing meant becoming someone new. But he did it. He proved he didn't need alcohol to be a metal legend. His guitar still roared, his shows still rocked, and his reputation only grew. He showed that even the hardest partiers could change. 8. Jeff Hanneman. Hanneman was a thrash metal legend. As a founding member of Slayer, his sharp riffs and fast solos helped define the band's brutal sound. His music was raw, aggressive, and unforgettable. But off-stage, he fought a different battle, not with guitars, but with alcohol. For Jeff, drinking wasn't just for fun, it was a way of life. On tour, in the studio, backstage, he always had a drink in his hand. At first, it seemed harmless, part of the rock star lifestyle. But over time, the damage built up. His playing started to slip, his energy faded, but he kept pushing forward, refusing to slow down. He was still dedicated to Slayer, but his body was wearing out. Then one bite changed everything. In 2011, a spider bite led to a rare flesh-eating infection. A healthier body might have fought it off, but years of drinking had weakened his immune system. He had to leave Slayer, the band he had helped build. Isolated and frustrated, he drank even more. Instead of recovering, he sank deeper. By 2013, his liver gave out. At 49, Jeff was gone. His music still echoes, his influence undeniable, but his story is a warning. No one is indestructible. The man who wrote some of the most powerful riffs in metal was taken down by something that seemed small but was deadly. 9. Tom Araya. Araya was at the center of thrash metal's wildest days. As the frontman and bassist for Slayer, he lived fast, drank hard, and embraced the chaos. Late nights turned into early mornings, fueled by alcohol and the non-stop energy of the scene. Being part of one of the most extreme metal bands only made things worse. The pressure of constant touring meant drinking became a routine part of life. Unlike some of his peers, Tom never completely lost control. He drank heavily, but never let it destroy him. Still, years of this lifestyle took a toll. By the mid-2000s, he realized he needed to change. Instead of chasing the same old habits, he started taking care of himself. While Slayer kept delivering intense performances, he stepped away from the hard-partying lifestyle that had once defined him. When Slayer announced their farewell tour in 2018, Tom had already left his reckless drinking days behind. Unlike many who burned out, he found a way to survive. He didn't become another tragic story of excess. He walked away with his legacy intact. While many of his fellow musicians fell victim to addiction, he proved it was possible to pull back before it was too late. 10. Paul Di'Anno. Had a voice that matched his attitude, raw, loud, and full of energy. As Iron Maiden's first singer, Paul Di'Anno gave the band its early edge, but behind the scenes, he was already spiraling. From the start, alcohol was a problem. He showed up to rehearsals drunk, stumbled through performances, and tested the patience of his bandmates. His lifestyle was as wild as his voice, unpredictable and reckless. As Iron Maiden grew in popularity, the pressure only made things worse. He drank before shows, disappeared for days, and became a problem for the band. His behavior became too much to handle. By 1981, Maiden had no choice but to let him go. While the band was ready to rise to the top, he was dragging them down. After leaving Iron Maiden, he struggled to keep his career together. Legal troubles, arrests, and poor health followed him. He became a symbol of wasted potential, a reminder that talent isn't enough if alcohol takes over. He jumped between short-lived projects, never regaining what he had lost. While Iron Maiden reached worldwide fame with Bruce Dickinson as their new frontman, his voice faded into the background, a reminder of what could have been. 11. Scott Ian. Helped make thrash metal what it is today. As the guitarist for Anthrax, Scott Ian's fast playing and aggressive sound set the tone for the genre, but in the early years, he was just as focused on drinking as he was on his music. In the 1980s, thrash metal was all about going big, loud music, late nights, and heavy drinking. He was right in the middle of it. For a long time, the drinking didn't seem like a problem. Every night was a party, and alcohol was part of the lifestyle. But over time, it started to wear him down. Hangovers got worse, playing became harder, and he started feeling the effects on his body. What once felt like energy now felt like a drain. He was still performing at full speed, but he knew it wouldn't last forever. Unlike many musicians who lost control, Ian saw the warning signs. By the mid-2000s, he decided to cut back on drinking before it took over his life. That choice saved him. He stayed strong in the metal world while many others burned out. He proved that you could be intense and still take care of yourself. His decision kept him not only alive, but also at the top of his game, showing that self-control doesn't have to destroy the spirit of metal. 12. Joey Belladonna was the powerful voice behind Anthrax. Joey Belladonna's singing gave the band a unique sound, and his high-energy performances made him a standout frontman. But like many rock stars, his life was also filled with drinking. In the 1980s and early 1990s, alcohol was always there, before shows, in the studio, and after performances. It wasn't just something he enjoyed, it was part of his routine. At first, he handled it well. Even after a night of drinking, he could still put on a great show, but not always. Some nights, the alcohol caught up with him. He would forget lyrics, slur his words, or struggle to keep up with the fast pace of the music. It started causing problems within the band. Anthrax was rising in the metal world, and they needed to be at their best. His drinking became a problem they couldn't ignore. As the band got bigger, the pressure only grew. Drinking became both a way to cope and a problem that wouldn't go away. It hurt his relationships with his bandmates and made his future with Anthrax uncertain. In 1992, the band fired him, and his drinking was one of the reasons. Years later, he returned to the band, but his reputation as a hard-drinking frontman stuck with him. 13. Max Cavalera faced more than just fame. He battled his own struggles. Max Cavalera, the mind behind Sepultura and Soulfly, saw drinking as part of the fun in the band's early days, a way to celebrate success. But as Sepultura grew famous with albums like Beneath the Remains and Arise, so did his drinking. What started as a habit became something he couldn't control. Everything fell apart in 1996 when his stepson, Dana Wells, died suddenly. The pain was too much, and alcohol became his only way to cope. He drank to forget, but it only made things worse. Sepultura was already full of tension, and by 1997 he was out. The official reason was band disagreement, but his drinking had become a major problem. Losing his band and his stepson left him lost. Once at the top of the metal world, now he had to start from scratch. He kept drinking in those early years, sinking deeper. But unlike many rock stars who never recover, Cavalera fought back. He started Soulfly, using music to work through his pain. It wasn't easy, but he slowly rebuilt his life. He never forgot the past, but he found a way to move forward. 14. Cliff Burton lived fast and played hard. Cliff Burton, Metallica's legendary bassist, embraced the thrash metal lifestyle where drinking wasn't just for fun, it was part of the culture. He kept up with his bandmates in bars, tour buses, and hotel rooms, fully immersing himself in the chaos. Despite the wild nights, he never lost focus. Even after heavy drinking, Burton played bass like no one else. His classical influences made Metallica's sound unique, adding depth to their raw energy. No matter what, his talent never faded, but fate had other plans. In 1986, while Metallica was touring Europe, their bus skidded on an icy road. Burton was thrown from his bunk and trapped under the bus. He died instantly. The metal world was devastated, but his legend only grew. Fans still raised their drinks in his honor, celebrating his music and his wild spirit. Metallica moved on, but his influence never left. His bass lines, his passion, and his fearless energy stayed with the band. His life ended on that dark road, but his music lives on, roaring through every note played in his memory. 15. Mila Petrozza helped shape the most intense era of thrash metal. Mile Petrozza, the leader of Creator, made music that was loud, fast, and wild, just like his drinking. From the mid-1980s, alcohol was a big part of Creator's world. He drank before shows, during recordings, and late into the night, until the difference between fun and self-destruction disappeared. At first, it seemed like nothing could stop him. Even as Creator's fame grew with albums like Pleasure to Destroy and Extreme Aggression, his drinking never slowed down. But behind the scenes, trouble was building. He missed recording sessions. He messed up performances. The pressure to keep Creator on top pushed him deeper into drinking. What started as a way to relax became a problem he couldn't control. By the late 1990s, He realized that if he didn't stop, he wouldn't survive. He made the hard choice to cut back on drinking and face the damage it had done. Creator entered a new chapter, stronger than before. Petroza still had the fire inside him, but now he controlled it. His music became sharper and more focused, showing the battles he had fought and won. 16. Randy Blythe spent years trapped in a cycle of alcohol and rage. Randy Blythe, the intense singer of Lamb of God, lived for the stage, drinking, and anger from the late 1990s into the 2000s. It wasn't just a habit, it was his shield, his weapon, and his downfall. His voice shook concert halls. His energy was explosive, but behind it all was a man losing control. Every show, every night, was another excuse to drink more. By the late 2000s, things had reached a breaking point. He blacked out, made reckless choices, and felt darkness closing in. Then came the moment that changed everything: his 2012 arrest in the Czech Republic. A fan's tragic death put him in prison, forcing him to sit in a cell, stripped of everything, including the alcohol he relied on. He had no choice but to face his past. Locked up, he saw his life for what it really was, a path leading straight to destruction. When he was released, he was a different man. Sobriety became his new battle. He proved that a metal singer didn't need alcohol to be powerful. Today, he still sings with the same fire, but his strength comes from clear-headed determination, not chaos. He got a second chance, and he never wasted it. Now he shares his story to help others stuck in the same destructive cycle. His journey isn't just about redemption. It's proof that even in the darkest times, there's a way forward. 17. Glenn Tipton is a legend in heavy metal. Glenn Tipton, as Judas Priest's guitarist, created some of the most famous riffs in rock history. But behind the music, he spent years drinking, unaware of the damage it was doing. In the wild 70s and 80s, alcohol was always around, on tour buses and studios, before and after shows. For a long time, it seemed like nothing could slow him down. Even with the drinking, he kept playing, writing, and performing. He seemed unstoppable, but inside, something was changing. Years of drinking made his body weaker, and he developed Parkinson's disease. His once steady hands started to shake, making it harder to play the solos that defined Judas Priest's sound. By the time he realized what was happening, it was too late to undo the damage. In 2018, he had to stop full-time touring. He still plays sometimes, but the effects of his past choices remain. His story is a reminder that even the strongest are not invincible. His music still inspires, and his fight against his illness shows his strength. He may not play like before, but his legacy will never fade. 18. Igor Cavalera. In thrash metal, few drummers hit as hard as Igor Cavalera. He helped Sepultura rise to fame, creating beats that shaped a generation. But along with the music came heavy drinking. In the 80s and 90s, alcohol was everywhere, backstage, in hotels, on tour buses. It felt like part of the lifestyle. As Sepultura grew, so did Igor's drinking. It fueled long nights, celebrations, and the pressure of fame. But over time, it took more than it gave. His relationships, especially with his brother Max, started falling apart. His drumming, once powerful and precise, suffered. He played through the haze, but the fire that once drove him was fading. In the early 2000s, he had a wake-up call. He left Sepultura and stepped away from the chaos. He cut back on drinking and focused on rebuilding his life and his bond with Max. This led to Cavalera Conspiracy, a fresh start, a second chance. Unlike many others, he turned back before it was too late. Today, he plays with clarity and passion, proving that redemption is real. His music and legacy continue, stronger than ever. 19. Chuck Schuldiner changed death metal forever. Chuck Schuldiner, the mastermind behind Death, crafted music that was intense, breaking new ground with every album. In the early years, drinking was part of the scene, a way to escape and fit in. The 80s were filled with heavy riffs and heavy drinking as he built one of the most influential metal bands of all time. But he was different. As time passed, he realized that music mattered more than partying. He saw too many musicians waste their talent on alcohol, and he refused to be one of them. By the time Death released albums like Spiritual Healing and Human, he had left the drinking culture behind. He focused on his craft, pushing his music to new heights. His journey was one of transformation. He chose discipline over excess, vision over distraction. While others burned out, he grew stronger. His legacy is not one of destruction, but of evolution. Even though illness took him too soon, his music remains timeless. He proved that metal isn't just about wild living, it's about passion, hard work, and breaking limits. Many rock stars lost everything to excess. Some found their way back. But one thing is clear, the road of excess leads somewhere, and not everyone finds a way home. 20. Peter Steele wasn't just the lead singer of Type O Negative, he was a giant, both in size and presence. Peter Steele's deep voice and dark lyrics made him unforgettable, but behind the music he struggled with sadness. Depression followed him everywhere, and he turned to alcohol to escape. Wine and vodka became his way of coping, offering short relief before dragging him deeper into misery. It wasn't just a bad habit, it became his life. As Type O Negative became famous with albums like Bloody Kisses and October Rust, his drinking got worse. Some nights he was a powerful performer, taking over the stage. Other nights he could barely stand, slurring his words and losing himself in the fog of alcohol. His friends watched as he fell apart, his body breaking down after years of heavy drinking. He spoke openly about his struggles, knowing how much damage he was doing, but the pull of the bottle was too strong. He tried to turn his life around, working on his health and even exploring spirituality, but the damage had already been done. In 2010, his heart stopped, shocking the metal world. For those who knew his struggles, it wasn't surprising. It was just a sad ending they had feared for years. His story is a reminder of how pain can consume even the strongest people. 21. Tom G. Warrior made his mark on metal by refusing to follow the rules. Tom G. Warrior, the mastermind behind Celtic Frost and Triptykon, pushed metal into new and risky directions. But that kind of ambition came with a cost. Critics tore him down, and the pressure became too much. To deal with it, he started drinking. At first, it was just a way to relax, but soon it became his escape from failure and frustration. As Celtic Frost grew with albums like Morbid Tales and To Megatherion, so did his drinking. His creativity suffered, and mistakes followed. The album Cold Lake was a disaster, and it nearly destroyed his career. He lost confidence, drowning in alcohol and doubt. The dream that had once driven him was now slipping away, but he wasn't ready to give up. In the 2000s, Warrior fought back, leaving behind heavy drinking and reclaiming his music. With Triptykon, he found his voice again, proving that it was never too late to turn things around. His story is one of survival, but it also raises a question: how many others never get the chance to come back? 22. Vinnie Paul. Living for the party, Vinnie Paul was always at the center of the wildest moment. As the drummer of Pantera and later Hell Yeah, alcohol wasn't a problem for him. It was part of the celebration. When Pantera became one of the biggest metal bands, the drinking never stopped. With his brother, Dimebag Darrell, he turned every tour into a party that seemed like it would never end. Backstage, there were always kegs and whiskey bottles. The Blacktooth Grin, a drink made with Crown Royal and Coke, became Pantera's signature toast. Vinnie could drink all night and still play the drums like a machine. He made it look easy, like nothing could stop him. Then, in 2004, everything changed. Dimebag was murdered on stage and Vinnie's world fell apart. Drinking wasn't fun anymore. It became a way to escape his grief. Even though he kept making music with Hell Yeah, he was never the same. Years of partying caught up with him, and in 2018, his heart gave out. He had once seemed unstoppable, but even the hardest rockers can't outrun time. What if the party hadn't gone on for so long? 23. Eddie Clarke. Pure energy. That's what Eddie Fast Clarke was. More than just a guitarist, He dove headfirst into a world of loud music, endless whiskey, and chaos as part of Motorhead. If Lemmy Kilmister was the king of Jack Daniels, Clark was right beside him, matching every drink and every reckless move. From the late 70s, his guitar powered Motorhead's fast, furious sound. His riffs shook the stage, helping create classics like Ace of Spades and Over. Motorhead wasn't just a band. They lived and breathed heavy metal. Their shows were a whirlwind of sound, speed, and alcohol. Clark's raw, aggressive playing fit perfectly with their wild energy, but the hard-living lifestyle caught up with him. By the early 80s, tensions within the band and years of drinking took their toll. Clark left Motorhead and started a new band, Fastway, but it wasn't the same. Unlike Lemmy, who seemed unstoppable, Clark's body started breaking down. He slowed down, but the damage was already done. He passed away in his 60s, but his guitar work still roars through speakers today. Bon Scott. Rock and roll itself. That's what Bon Scott was. More than just the front man of AC/DC, his voice was rough, full of attitude, and soaked in whiskey. When he stepped on stage, he owned it, turning every show into a wild party. He didn't just drink, he dove into the chaos head first, living with no limits. He would disappear for days, only to return just in time to belt out another AC/DC anthem. His energy was electric, his presence impossible to ignore. But behind the carefree grin, his body was running on borrowed time. Years of drinking and partying finally caught up with him. One cold night in 1980, after another night of heavy drinking, Scott was found lifeless in a parked car. His sudden death was a brutal reminder that even rock's biggest legends aren't invincible. AC/DC was shattered but pushed forward, releasing Back in Black as a tribute. Though Scott was gone, his voice still echoes through time, roaring through speakers with the same unstoppable energy. 25. Wendy O. Williams. More than a singer, Wendy O. Williams was a storm of rebellion. She didn't just perform, she destroyed expectations. Her shows were full of chaos, from chainsaws to burning cars, and her voice was a scream of pure defiance. She wasn't just a front woman, she was a revolution on stage. She stood toe-to-toe with the biggest rock stars, proving she could outdrink and outlast anyone. If the boys lived fast, she lived faster. But even the toughest warriors can't outrun time. By the 90s, the fire inside her began to burn out. The endless road, the destruction, the battles, it all took its toll. She faded from the spotlight, and her story ended in the most tragic way. But Wendy O. Williams didn't disappear. Her name still stands as a symbol of fearless rebellion, and her voice still echoes, daring anyone to follow where she led.